If you do not have insulin resistance, there is essentially no correlation between LDL and cardiovascular disease.
That's an absolute lie.
Super excited to...
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm a board certified cardiologist. I'm also a certified personal trainer. I don't know if people know that. I love coaching sports. In fact, I have some football to coach later today. But so for me personally, obviously I've been doing this a long time. I think if we back up a little bit and just talk a little bit about lipoproteins and what they are. I know your audience is very intelligent and they're all into this, and I've watched and even had debates with them online sometimes. But lipoproteins serve some very important purposes. A lot of people say, well, don't we need cholesterol? Why are you telling us to lower it? Doesn't your brain need cholesterol? Don't your testicles, hormones, adrenal glands, ovaries, doesn't all that need cholesterol? And yes, absolutely, every single cell in your body needs cholesterol. And in fact, every single cell in your body makes its own cholesterol. So I think that's one thing that's very important to just say at the outset. A lot of people think I'm anti-cholesterol, or I think that cholesterol is this thing we need to complete.
This is already off to a rough start. Just because your body's cells need cholesterol, that doesn't mean it's safe to have any amount of cholesterol in your serum. So I don't know why he's starting off with this. He should have started off with the fact that you've stated cholesterol is so important for our body. Obviously it is, but that doesn't mean any amount of it in your serum is healthy. That's what he should have said.
Eliminate? No, you really can't do that. Every single cell needs cholesterol, and in every...
Yeah, so this is just going to confuse, Paul's audience of fucking tards who are completely illiterate.
Cell membrane, you have free cholesterol, and cells would not function, they would not be fluid without free cholesterol. The problem comes in when you have too much cholesterol floating around in your bloodstream. Now, cholesterol is a fat, and it cannot float around in a bloodstream, so it needs to be packaged up into these things called lipoproteins. This right here is what the inside looks like. The yellow is cholesterol ester. The turquoise color is triglycerides. This blue thing kind of on the outside that kind of runs through it is a structural protein called an ApoB. I know you guys are familiar with it because we've talked about it a lot. But an ApoB kind of is what tags the low-density lipoprotein and VLDL, IDL, and lipoprotein a, the more atherogenic lipoproteins as the B structures. They have this B structure on it. The HDL, which let's say it's this other marker here, they have a different marker called an ApoA1. They can have from 1 to 5 of them on their structure, and it's not very accurate to measure that because what if one has 1 and one has 5? They're mostly in the form of 3s, but generally they can have up to 5 on each HDL. So this is very easy to measure. When you measure an ApoB, you measure an exact particle count almost of your lipoprotein. My view.
Yeah, and if you see an increase in particle count, that's going to result in an increase in heart disease. I don't know if Paul is going to make a more sophisticated argument and claim that you can increase LDL without increasing particle count. Technically, that can happen, but it never happens. If you have an increase in LDL, you're going to have an increase in particle count.
And of course I consider this the accurate view, is that LDL cholesterol is causative of atherosclerosis. Brian Ferentz and his group...
no, Brian Turner is not a fake natty.
From Europe wanted to prove, or at least say, what if we wanted to prove without question that LDL cholesterol is the cause of atherosclerosis? What criteria would need to be met in order for that to be accurate, or in order for that to be true? So they said most of the studies that are done on LDL cholesterol and show that it's not the cause, or it might be the cause, or it's not, it's questionable, are usually done on a small subset of studies, and they don't look at the totality of evidence. So Brian Ferentz said, and his group said, let's just look at every single study that's ever been done on cholesterol. Don't take anything out. Don't exclude studies. Don't cherry pick studies. Don't do anything. Look at every single study ever been done. So they ended up with 20 million person years of follow-up. They had, so for example, what does that mean? If you have 1 million people and you follow them around for 20 years, that's 20 million person years of follow-up. If you have 2 million people and you follow them around for 10 years, that's also 20 million person years of follow-up. So they wanted to look at every single study that has ever been done. And that's what they did. And they looked at Mendelian randomization studies. They looked at randomized control studies, cohort studies, genetic studies, pretty much anything you can imagine, epidemiological studies. Like they looked at pretty much every study that's ever been done, like I said, the totality of evidence. And they found that without question, no matter how you measure it, the higher the LDL cholesterol, the more likely you are to have atherosclerosis, heart attack, strokes, death, mortality from cardiovascular disease and non-cardiovascular disease. So they found in that case, after doing this, that it's very difficult to deny the science saying that that the LDL causes atherosclerosis. And we have like animal models. We've done human studies. We've looked at, how it happens and why it happens and what happens inside even the arteries, at the microscopic level, looking at the progression of atherosclerosis inside the arteries. And it just turns out that the higher the LDL, the higher the LDL proteins or lipoproteins, the more of these you have floating around your bloodstream, the more of them get inside.
Yeah, so he's recognizing that the more LDL you have, the more total particles you're going to have. Which is true. You can see differences between individuals where somebody might have a high amount of LDL, but their total particle count is low. But those same people, if they increase their LDL, their particle count is going to increase. So the only route of attack I could see, and it's really like an extremely semantic kind of argument for Paul, is the only rational route he could go down is that particle count is what increases disease risk, and having a higher LDL doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a high particle count. But again, it's semantic. If you have more LDL, you're going to have a higher particle count.
VG, look, Negos.
Wow.
Neko.
Or arterial walls. And I'll just bring up this model we talked about. This is what normal artery
What do you think was flawed with the Trent Horn's argument?
looks like. This thin pink layer is the endothelium. As time goes on, you start getting atherosclerosis, but it's still inside the arterial wall. It's not in the lumen. You can still drive a truck through here without any problems. As time goes on, it eventually gets here to late stage. This is kind of the point where calcium starts building up. A lot of people say, well, my calcium score is fine. I have LDL 200, 300, what have you, but my calcium score looks great. It's 0. Well, do you want to wait till you have late stage atherosclerosis before, you attack this?
I think about half of heart attacks, like you can get a calcium score. I think about half of fucking people who end up getting heart attacks either have a calcium score of 0 or like just barely above 0. So it's not even really a good predictor of a heart attack. So those calcium scoring tests don't really say much.
Problem. I give my patients the example. I say, well, it's kind of like smoking. If we do a lung scan and we finally find lung cancer, then we say, okay, now's a good time to stop smoking. Why couldn't we tell them, when they're teenagers, you should stop smoking, because we know decades later, 34.
Yeah, this is actually an extremely good opening response. I don't like the way he opened his debate proposition, just because it's a little confusing when he said cholesterol's good, I'm not against cholesterol, and then he explained why you need to lower your cholesterol. That's a little confusing, I think, for some people. You have to keep in mind you're talking to fucking idiots. But I mean, there's just absolute smoking gun evidence that LDL is responsible for heart disease. And yeah, obviously, you want to prevent the plaques from building up.
40, 50, 60 years later, what have you, you'll have lung cancer. So it's similar kind of with lipoproteins and LDL cholesterol. We know that if you have ApoBs. There are people with genetic mutations that have an ApoB of like 10 to 15. These are people with PCSK9 loss of function mutations, which is how we invented the PCSK9 medications like Repatha, Praluent, and now inclisiran. People with knocked out PCSK9s, or the PCSK9 gene doesn't function, they have an LDL cholesterol like 10, 15, maybe 20 at the most, and they live the longest, and they live the longest atherosclerosis free. Sure, as they get older, they'll probably get something else. Obviously, everyone has to die. But we know that they at least won't have
yeah, the frequency of these genes that cause low cholesterol, like these genes that inhibit PCSK9, you see a higher frequency in elderly people because there's a survivor bias. The people who didn't have those genes died off. Or more of those people who didn't have those genes died off. And then the people who have these genes that are beneficial for long-term survival, like these PCSK9 mutations, end up living longer.
Atherosclerosis. So that's kind of where the consensus of the data is, the studies. Almost every study that has been done that lowers LDL cholesterol has definitely proven to have better outcomes than not. So that's kind of my stance. I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing your view on it. I don't think, I've watched a lot of your videos and your podcast. I don't think we differ that much in our views, but fire away.
So my perspective is a little different than yours. And it is that cardiovascular disease is a really important problem for humans. And it's critical that we are careful in our consideration of this disease, and that we are
not a response to anything you said.
Detail-oriented in our consideration of the risk factors, so that we can help people understand what the true risk factors are. For instance, if we are looking at LDL as the wrong risk factor, or there are other more important risk factors, I think it's important to point those things out to people. And so
LDL lowering has been the most effective targeted therapy. So that's just a bullshit statement.
When I hear arguments like the totality of the evidence, I'm reminded of the way that vegans think about plant-based studies and meat studies. And if you look at the totality of evidence...
So just rambling bullshit. LDL has been the most effective targeted therapy. So this is just rambling horseshit. This is going to be like an hour of him obfuscating, rambling, gish galloping, just pure nonsense. This is what he fucking does.
Do you think
or vegetables versus meat? For humans, you can draw conclusions that I think are false, which is that meat is bad for humans, that meat is associated with decreased longevity, that meat is associated with increased incidence of cardiovascular disease. When, if you...
Dude, this is insane. Just think of what he's saying. Association. It is. Like, the fact is that it is associated with lower longevity. People who eat plant-based diets tend to live longer. Like... Please, and again, when he fights back against the information, he doesn't actually show that there's better research showing an association between meat eating and longevity. He'll delve into this extremely speculative mechanistic research. So he recognizes that there is an association between meat eating and early death. Because his only response to this is to delve into really speculative mechanistic research and basically misinterpret all the data.
You look at the details, you arrive at different conclusions. So I think that arguments based on totality of the evidence are dangerous, and we need to dig into the details.
Sorry. Arguments relying on the totality of evidence and looking at all the data are dangerous, and we need to cherry pick low-level evidence in order to get to the truth. That's his fucking opening statement. You can't make this up.
The devil is in the details, as they say. And when I look at the details of LDL in connection with cardiovascular disease, what I find is that there are many instances that are important, not just a few, but there are many instances that are important to consider where LDL cholesterol does not associate with cardiovascular.
Oh my God. Yeah, so he's basically going to cherry pick He's going to cherry pick studies on elderly populations where you can see a reverse causation effect, where as you age, decreasing cholesterol can actually be a sign of, death approaching, because either as a direct or indirect effect of disease, your cholesterol can decrease. There's certain cancers that metabolize cholesterol and they'll actually lower your serum cholesterol. Sickness can also make you eat less, and actually a lot of people end up having reduced appetite as they age. That's a sign that you're not going to live as long, and they actually make medications for elderly people so that they have a bigger appetite, so they eat more, so they can maintain bodily function better. Like that. So lowering cholesterol isn't what's causing those deaths. It's some other disease lowering cholesterol, but cholesterol isn't part of the causal chain. And again, how the fuck do you explain away the Mendelian randomization studies? You see a higher frequency in these genes in elderly populations. So if low cholesterol was part of the causal chain that's causing these deaths, how the fuck do you see a higher frequency of these genes lowering cholesterol? He's such an idiot. Very easy to... for the donation, nigger farts. How much tofu do I eat today? It's 1 to 2 blocks.
The disease. And so you have any study in which LDL cholesterol is stratified by a metric that correlates with insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, you see totally different amounts of correlation between LDL and cardiovascular disease when people are very insulin resistant versus minimally insulin resistant. There are genetic outliers.
So this is ridiculous. If you look at any fucking study on the effect of serum cholesterol, it could be a randomized trial or a prospective cohort. They control for those variables and they have inclusion restrictions. So they'll restrict people who are diabetic. So what the fuck is he talking about? And including in these diabetic communities, cholesterol still has an association. There's a better association with ApoB, but it's basically the same thing. So what is he talking about? Even in healthy populations of people without insulin resistance or diabetes, there's an association between cholesterol. He's just bullshitting here. Yeah, it's just that if you're diabetic, your lipid profile
you got to see
like glycogen storage disease 1A or von Gerke's disease, where people have hyperlipidemia but no increased atherosclerosis. There are many, many elderly studies in which people who are...
Yeah, so this is basically an argument from marginal claims. Again, if he's going to admit that generally this is a relevant risk factor for most people, and then he has to find an obscure paper looking at an obscure disease and saying, oh, there's no association between LDL here. What are you fucking doing?
80, 85 plus who have elevated LDL cholesterol tend to live the longest.
Yeah, so this is just gish galloping. He's just showing 80 papers on screen. Let me see if I can recognize some of these researcher names. I think he actually used a paper from Ufi Ravenscoff, which is fucking hilarious. Yeah, there we go. Ufi Ravenscoff. He's referring to this garbage fucking paper that was authored by Ufi Ravenscoff, where he literally excluded a ton of fucking Mendelian randomization studies and recent prospective cohorts. And he cherry-picked a bunch of fucking cadaver studies from the 1930s. It just he has to just really dig at the bottom of the fucking barrel.
Arteries, cerebral arteries, aorta, and femoral arteries, amounts of atheroma. If you look at the amount of ApoB in a plaque, that doesn't correlate with the amount of ApoB in the serum, suggesting that.
Sorry, what? Who the fuck cares? What? Like, I don't even understand. There's a number of things within plaques. You're going to have ApoB like permeate the arterial wall, but then you're also going to have foam cells, immune cells go to attack the ApoB, and then they become foam cells. So you're not just going to find LDL particles within plaques. I don't know how the fuck this is relevant. Like, again, if he wants to debunk this, just show Mendelian randomization studies. That would be the easiest way to refute this. If LDL is not part of the causal chain, then you could prove this with Mendelian randomization studies. Like, it's very simple. So what this guy should do right off the bat is just say, show me a Mendelian randomization study where people with low LDL don't have lower risk of heart disease, or inversely, show me a Mendelian randomization study where people with higher LDL don't have increased risk. This is just stupid.
There's discordance there between ApoB in the serum and ApoB in the plaque. Similarly, and this is the work of Sam Semikis, if you correct LDL for Lp(a) levels, then LDL corrected for Lp(a) is no longer predictive of cardiovascular disease. It's only when the
That's not true.
A component of LDL is not accounted for that LDL is connected with cardiovascular disease.
So that's not true. I don't even think that paper stated that. Obviously, higher HDL is associated with lower risk of heart disease, but it's not part of the causal chain. Low density lipoprotein cholesterol corrected for lipoprotein A cholesterol risk thresholds, cardiovascular events. So this should be the paper. LDL-C was associated with incident cardiovascular disease only when little protein A cholesterol content was included in its measurement, refinement, and techniques to accuracy. To accurately measure LDL-C, particularly in patients with elevated lipoprotein A levels, warranted to assign risk to the responsible lipoproteins. So lipoprotein A cholesterol content was estimated as 30% of lipoprotein A mass and subtracted from LDL-C to obtain corrected LDL-C values. So basically, this paper is not suggesting that LDL-C isn't associated with heart disease risk. They're just saying you get a more accurate fucking picture when you include lipoprotein a. That's it. And let's see. When comparing top versus bottom quartiles, the multivariable adjusted hazard ratio for cardiovascular disease was significant for LDL-C. 1.17, so 17% higher, but not for LDL-C corrected. So that was not statistically significant. In routine laboratory database involving reclassification of patients across guideline, recommended LDL-C categories when using LDL-C corrected where it was assessed in LDL-C categories of 70 to 100, 100 to 130, 130 to 190, and 190 milligrams or greater. Significant proportions of participants were reassigned to lower LDL-C categories when LDL corrected was used. So they're not fucking saying LDL-C is not a fucking biomarker. He's just lying. Alawali, let me see.
Bitchas Ninja, last dono after and before the dono after I dono this.
Lp(a) levels, then LDL corrected for Lp(a) is no longer predictive of cardiovascular disease.
That's
it's
not
only
true.
when the Lp(a) component of LDL
That's not true. He misread the paper.
is not accounted for, that LDL is connected with cardiovascular disease. And so we run into all of these problems. And I think this is what I was saying to you earlier about this, what is water?
He just misread the paper. After they corrected, they found lower associations. That's it.
This amazing commencement speech that David Foster Wallace gave, and the title of the speech is What is Water? And the summary of that speech is that there are these two fish and they're swimming around and they pass an older fish. And the older fish says, how's the water today? And they don't know how to respond and they kind of swim away and they ask each other in private, what is water? And so when I see the mainstream analyses, like you're talking about.
Yeah, so again, all this guy, the cardiologist, Dr. Alo, has to do is ask him if he wants to prove LDL or ApoB is not related to heart disease, show me a Mendelian randomization study. Just one. That's all he has to do. That would be a nail in the coffin, but he can't. I'm just going to skip ahead.
And we can get confused and we know that when people are metabolically unwell, there's a strong correlation between.
Here we go. Yeah, more gish galloping, and then he's promoting a supplement.
This is my...
Stopped looking at that maybe in 2005. Even some of the guests you've had on your podcast have said that that's not really an issue. The liver clears oxidized LDL pretty quickly. So does your immune system. So that's not the problem. You can't really argue that. The argument...
Like, if you're talking about oxidized LDL in your serum, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with heart disease pathology.
Disagree with you, but we'll talk about that.
I mean, we could talk about it, but let me give you sort of my explanations as for the things that you were saying. There are some people who have...
Okay, I don't know why he was going down this route. The easiest route to go down would be, again, like Paul brought up a bunch of like really... He misrepresented some of the research, but he just randomly cherry-picked a bunch of studies that he claimed demonstrated a lack of association between LDL or ApoB and heart disease. All this guy has to do is say, okay, well, if there's no association between LDL and heart disease, the best research to fucking demonstrate this would be Mendelian randomization studies, because you're basically eliminating every other fucking variable, and you're only looking at the variable of LDL or ApoB. So show me a Mendelian randomization study that shows there's no association between LDL or ApoB. He can't. He has to cherry pick bullshit fucking research, like that fucking garbage paper from Ufi Ravenscoff. Like, it's mostly just stupid opinion papers. Or he has to misrepresent the findings of these other papers that are looking at how other biomarkers, along with LDL, affect heart disease risk.
Things called insulomas, where they have these tumors that secrete a ton of insulin, and they don't have increased atherosclerosis. Another thing I offer is the percentage of people that are actually insulin resistant in the United States, according to CDC guideline publications and stats. 9% of all people have type 2 diabetes in the United States and pretty much worldwide. 11% have diabetes because type 1 is also included. It's another 1 to 2% of the population. The amount of people, if you look at the CDC, that count people as insulin resistant, like pre-diabetic but not yet diabetic, is probably, depending on the study you look at and how you want to measure it, anywhere from like 15% of the population up to like maybe 38%, let's just say 40. But they have done studies. For example, there were studies that have been done on people who are completely like metabolically healthy, like these young kids. There's multiple different kinds of familial hypercholesterolemia. There's monogenic homozygous, right? These are the worst of the worst. This kid by age...
Yeah, so if you're homozygous for hypercholesterolemia, you can literally die in your teens. You might not even make it to your teens because your cholesterol levels are so high. You can have LDL literally in the thousands. So, again, clearly, when we're talking about having LDL in the thousands, it's just indisputable. LDL is a risk factor. He's on the right track. I don't know why he wouldn't have brought that up right off the get-go. Like, why didn't he just demand that Paul show a Mendelian randomization study? Like, that would have fucking ended the debate in like 10 seconds. Paul would have had to have like gone, like he would have been shaking.
5 has already had a heart attack or stroke, subsequent ones later, and is dead by age 20, without question. Monogenic homozygous. The monogenic heterozygous is a little bit, not as bad. They might get to 25, 30. The polygenic homozygous by age 30, 35 has had their first event. And then you have the, polygenic heterozygous, which could make it up to like 50, 55. Depending on their sex, with atherosclerosis.
If Paul decides to debate him here, what you might actually end up seeing from Paul is he'll say, oh, but in elderly populations, you can actually still see these people with heterozygous hypercholesterolemia. And they're living, into their 70s, 80s like a normal person. That's just called survivor bias. All the people who had more severe forms of hypercholesterolemia had already died off, or there's other risk factors in their life that just give them a better survivability. So they might have lower stress, their diet might be better overall, they might exercise, keep their weight down, stuff like that. Or you might see Paul just flat out denying the existence of hypercholesterolemia, even though we know the exact fucking genes.
So those are people that are generally healthy. Their LDL is, big and fluffy. They don't have insulin resistance. They're young kids, what have you. There are some trials that have been done to answer this exact question that you're asking. What if we took a bunch of young, healthy people, no atherosclerosis, no insulin resistance, CAC score of 0, your calcium score of 0, and what?
I'm gonna email this guy. Where is he? There he is. I just genuinely don't understand why you wouldn't have demanded Paul present Mendelian randomization data. I'm just gonna email him just so he knows for like a future debate. Paul Saladino debate advice. Why the fuck isn't my keyboard working? Is the fucking battery low or something? Give me a second. Yeah. No, I don't even think it's the battery. Hey, it's Vegan Gains, and I just saw your debate with Paul. Dino, I just wanted to say, I think you made a small misstep at the beginning of the debate. After you present Nation Quest, glad I could help.
What if we looked at them and just looking at what do they have? What if we looked at, subclinical atherosclerosis? It was called the PISA trial, the prevention of early subclinical atherosclerosis. These people had an average age of 45, maybe 46. Only 15% of them were overweight or obese, so very lean. And they looked at very high quality imaging. This is like 3D, MRI, intravenous IVUS, like all kinds of stuff that's not available to us as clinicians. It's, super high tech imaging. They found that 45% of people with an LDL of 110, which was normal at the time, we don't consider that normal anymore, but 110, 45% of people had atherosclerosis. And then if you looked at people with LDL of 130, it went up to 58%. And if you looked at LDL of 150, it was 64%, which like almost 70%.
So this isn't anything unique to this particular study. Like, this is just what they do in general. They usually have exclusion criteria where they don't allow for people with multiple risk factors aside from LDL. So they'll just screen out people who are obese, diabetic, have cancer. Like, they may even screen out people who have a family history of heart disease. So this isn't a unique paper. He should have pointed that out, that Paul is like literally just telling a fib. It's normal that they have exclusion criteria in these studies so that you're only looking at LDL as the risk factor. Dude, fuck me.
Subclinical atherosclerosis. And most of those people that had it in one bed had it in more than one arterial bed. 63% had atherosclerosis in more than one arterial bed. So that one kind of goes against that. There's another study very similar called the Cardiologist trial where they looked at about 5,000 young.
So in my mind, he's already won the debate, but if he really wanted to just annihilate Paul right off the bat, he should have just demanded that Paul present Mendelian randomization studies. Because again, if Paul is saying this is like some kind of non-causal association, that's what Paul's essentially stating. Paul's admitting there's a lot of studies that show an association between cholesterol and heart disease. He's stating because he can cherry pick these random studies that fail to see an association, that it's probably non-causal. So if he wanted to prove it's non-causal, the best research he could use is Mendelian randomization. So there's not a single Mendelian randomization study that shows a lack of association between LDL and heart disease. So he'd basically have to admit the best data available isn't in support of his fucking claim. And that would have been really the nail in the coffin for the debate. He's still winning. This is just the longer, harder way to do it.
Men, starting at age 18 to 36. And they looked at people who had the lowest LDLs versus the highest LDLs. The people who had the lowest LDL had the time to first visit for an atherosclerotic event of like 15 years more than normal. Whereas the higher the LDL went, the sooner and sooner they actually had to see and had an incident event or like that first event. In terms of autopsy reports, they've done autopsies on fetuses, miscarriages, and abortions where mom had cholesterol of like 200-300. They had fatty streaks in their aorta. Vietnam, war veterans, autopsy veterans from World War II, same thing. The higher.
Yeah, that would actually be a really good research to reference. You can see Vietnam War veterans, so soldiers that died fighting in Vietnam, they would have had to have been in physically good condition in order to like be in the military and fight. So if you're seeing fatty streaks in their arteries, like that's a good indication that clearly fucking obesity and insulin resistance isn't the only risk factor.
Their cholesterol, the more fatty streaks and the more atherosclerosis they had. So I think that kind of argues against it. The Jupiter trial, which was a primary prevention trial where they put people on Crestor and whatnot. That's
night, Jesus Christ.
The amount of people that were overweight in that trial was only 15%. So again, I feel like these studies have been done. A friend of mine on Twitter asked me one time, can you please steelman the carnivore diet? If you had to argue for the carnivore diet, steelmanning, I'm sure you know this, but for your audience, is when you take the position of the opposition and say, give me your best shot. You're the cardiologist, you're America's cardiologist, whatever you want to call it. You know everything about this. Argue for carnivore for me. Tell me why I should eat red meat, right? So it was kind of a fun exercise. So I said, listen, here's what I would do if I was a carnivore and I wanted to promote this diet and this lifestyle. Here's what I would say. I'd say, look, just stop denying the evidence about ApoB and LDL-C and just leave that stuff alone. Say, yes, absolutely, high LDL, it is a problem, no big deal. Not everyone's LDL goes up with a red meat diet. Only like 30%.
That's not true. So, everyone is going to have an increase in LDL if they increase their intake of either cholesterol or saturated fat. So, in the case of cholesterol, there's a cutoff point where if your cholesterol intake is already high enough. Adding any more isn't going to make a change to your serum cholesterol score, but that doesn't mean added dietary cholesterol didn't raise your serum cholesterol score. And in the case of saturated fat, just absolutely indisputable. If you increase your intake of saturated fat, your cholesterol score is going up. I think what he might have meant to say is just because you're eating a lot of meat, it doesn't necessarily mean your cholesterol score is going to be high. If you increase your meat intake, your cholesterol is going to go up, like assuming all else is equal. But like the only real argument here would be if you eat a lot of meat and you can keep your cholesterol low through some means, maybe you're just genetically lucky, you make certain food choices, like you just avoid eating fatty cuts of meat, or you take cholesterol lowering medication, you make sure you stay very lean and exercise a lot, like that can all lower your LDL. But like that's still just not a good case for the carnivore diet.
Of people, and then argue for like how you feel on the diet. Not everyone feels good on the diet. I'm sure you've noticed, some people sent you emails or whatnot. But if you feel great on the diet, and I don't care what diet it is, you could do keto, you could do intermittent fasting, whatever diet you can adhere to. If you lose weight, we're very happy for you. All of your cardiovascular markers will improve with the weight loss alone. But let's say you do this carnivore diet, you lose 40, 50 pounds. You are going to feel better. It's an elimination diet. It gets rid of a lot of things that, people might have, various kinds of,
Yeah, this is too close to cuckoldry for me. Don't fucking give him this, like, where he can say, oh, see, he even admitted, like, the diet isn't bad. It obviously is. He should have never said this. Like, again, he should have just used the best available evidence right off the bat. And, like, again, if Paul is going to reject this premise or this claim that cholesterol is causally associated with heart disease, again, his job is to prove that it's non-causal. So he should have just demanded that he provided the evidence. So show me Mendelian randomization studies. Stop cherry picking weird random shit from fucking Ufi Ravenscoff. If you want to prove a lack of causal relationship, show me Mendelian randomization studies. End of fucking story. And just keep fucking asking Paul, show me the Mendelian randomization studies. I don't want to hear this fucking mechanistic bullshit. Show me the Mendelian randomization studies. But instead, like, he did make a good argument here that there's plenty of research on people who don't have obesity, don't have insulin resistance, they still develop heart disease, and it's obviously because of cholesterol. That's a fine argument, but like, again, if you just want to win the debate, he should have just demanded that Paul provide Mendelian randomization studies, because again, his whole position in the debate is that the relationship is non-causal. So if he wants to win, he just has to demand he provide the necessary evidence, and obviously he can't. So this was just not a good debate strategy.
Who knows, inflammation, what have you, but the weight loss alone improves your cardiovascular markers for the vast majority of people, even though it's higher saturated fat, red meat, what have you. So argue that way, say that. Stop talking about oxidized LDL and big LDL and little LDL. That makes no difference in cardiology. Whether your LDL, all LDLs between 20.
Okay, I'll show you things that completely disagree with you there, but I'll show you.
Yeah, so he's just giving Paul an opening to bullshit and Gish Gallop again. Again, what matters is total particle count. It doesn't really matter what the fucking particle size is. The particle count is what matters.
Evidence that says, yeah, absolutely.
No, I know. There is absolutely evidence. There's totally evidence for almost anything you want.
Yeah, that's a little disappointing.
That's easy to do.
How can you say oxidized LDL is not a risk factor for cardiovascular disease?
Because it oxidizes inside the arterial wall. If that's what you mean, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
but not circulating.
No.
Circulating oxidized LDLs.
No, but I'm talking about the propensity of LDL to oxidize in the arterial wall.
Well, that's an especially stupid claim. If he is going to claim that, all LDL, regardless of where like where the fat sources come from, it's going to oxidize. It just is. So he got him to admit that oxidation of LDL while it's in serum has nothing to do with heart disease pathology. So literally everything he already said in this debate about oxidized LDL is bullshit. That's kind of funny. He accidentally got him to admit that. All LDL is going to oxidize once it permeates the arterial wall. I'm gonna send him another message. Paul's position in the debate was that the association commonly seen between cholesterol and heart disease is non-causal. So all you had to do was...
I want to bookmark.
Oh, yeah, that's a different story.
We'll come back to that because there's solid evidence that increased linoleic acid in the human diet will increase the propensity of LDL to oxidize.
No, there isn't. So it will oxidize more than with like some other fats, but you actually see the most propensity to oxidize with saturated fat. And secondly, he just admitted, like, these studies are on oxidation within serum, not oxidation within the endothelial wall. So, like, he literally just admitted this is irrelevant. If he's going to claim you can have LDL particles that won't oxidize once they enter the endothelium, like, okay, where's the evidence for that dumb shit? He can't possibly show any evidence of that. Like, that's just a fucking horseshit claim. It absolutely will oxidize once it enters the endothelium. Doesn't matter what the fucking fat is composed of.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get it. We can get into seed oils. Yeah, we'll get into the linoleic acid and seed oils. And that's not a problem. But inside the arterial wall is a different story. I thought you meant like circulating oxidized.
No, I didn't say that.
No.
Yeah, so this is another mistake during the debate. He keeps wanting to refute every one of Paul's claims. He just doesn't have to do that. Like, and it's not even appropriate. Paul's proposition at the beginning of the debate is that cholesterol is a non-causal risk factor. It's not related causally. All he has to do is prove that it is. Well, he already has proven that it is causally related. He mentioned Mendelian randomization studies. The burden is now on Paul to argue his proposition, which is it's not causally related. The only way for him to do that is to present Mendelian randomization studies, and obviously he wouldn't be able to do that. He shouldn't have played this game where he keeps trying to refute every one of his points. Donation bill.
No, that made in the arterial wall, and that made
big pharma and big laboratory a lot of money, but it was a useless test. But so I would tell people, listen, just stop arguing with the stuff that just.
So again, if lowering oxidized LDL particles were like a viable targetable therapy, there would be medication for it, and there isn't for a reason. Like, again, the studies he'd present would be in serum, not within the endothelium. So, like, he admitted it's irrelevant. He's so stupid. Donate tellers. The only defense.
Just say, listen, I feel great on this diet. I lost a bunch of weight. My numbers actually got better. My inflammatory markers got better. My LDL went down. ApoB went down, what have you. That's all fine. There are going to be some people, if they eat keto, like a high saturated fat diet, their numbers are going to go up. And I know you're not keto, but their numbers will go up. And those people just say, listen, if you like this diet and you want to eat this way, just let us treat down your LDL. It's really not a big deal. There are medications now that will crush your LDL if you want it to, like, the Repatha on top of a statin plus Zetia plus whatever. We can get your LDL down to, like, the Fourier trial. If you looked at it, we got people's LDLs down to 0.2 millimoles, which translates into like 7.5 milligrams per deciliter, and they followed them for a long time. Nothing bad happened, but they had reduced cardiovascular outcomes.
They still had cardiovascular incidents, though. I mean, even
it was.
Well, they had prior events, so yeah, you'd still see incidents, but their incidences were minimized because of the reduction in cholesterol. You idiot.
No, I mean, it was almost nothing. I mean, we know from the Jupiter trial, below 57, LDL below 57, you almost have no atherosclerosis. So way below that, you have almost nothing. I mean, that's not even possible. But now back to the insulin resistance. Absolutely, if you take ApoB, people with an elevated ApoB, and throw on smoking and insulin resistance and hypertension and social determinants of health, lack of exercise, obesity, especially abdominal obesity, you tag on all that stuff, absolutely their risk goes way, way up. That's not even a question. I mean, that's been established for years. I don't think anyone's arguing that. But the more of these things you stack on to a high ApoB, you do get all of these things, obviously.
This guy, Paulism.
Yeah, okay, so lots of things. I have oxidized LDL, insulinoma, insulin resistance, FH, PISA study, Cardia study, autopsies, and Jupiter that I want to respond to that you said.
Fire away.
But before we get into any of it.
Don't. You've already proven your proposition. So now you just have to demand that he provides evidence for his fucking proposition. And he can't. Stop allowing him to fucking say, oh, but it's not LDL, it's oxidation. And then you just go down the whole, okay, well, clearly these studies don't show oxidation as a relation. And then he says, oh, but it's obesity. And then you show, okay, well, obesity isn't really like the root causal factor. Oh, but it's insulin resistance. And then you just demonstrate that you have to fucking debunk the proposition. And it's easy. You just have to demand that he fucking provides evidence. And he can't.
That. I think that I want to just do, I have thoughts on all of those things. I want to do two things. I want to show data corroborating my claim that 90+% of the United States is not optimally metabolically healthy. And then I want
to... That doesn't fucking matter. All you have to do is prove that cholesterol is not a causal factor. And all he has to do is provide Mendelian randomization studies, and he can't.
I ask you.
What is your definition of metabolically healthy?
Well, I'm going to show you the data.
Sure.
Yeah, they don't meet criteria for optimal metabolic health, and then I want to ask you about atherosclerosis in veins versus arteries, because that is it's not super technical. I think that all of these discussions...
It doesn't fucking matter. Like, yeah, you can have like a weird discussion on why you only see atheroma in arteries and not veins, but it doesn't fucking matter. Like, it has nothing to do with this fucking debate proposition.
It's about insulinomas and FH and PISA, cardiac autopsies, Jupiter. They're going to get a little technical. So I want to talk about veins and arteries before we get into the technical stuff, but we'll get there. So there are two studies done.
By the way, like, this is what he should point out too, is that if he's going to say LDL only presents as a risk factor if you're not optimally metabolically healthy, I don't know what the fuck that even means. And then he's saying 92% of Americans are not optimally metabolically healthy. Well, then in the American population, you have to acknowledge LDL as a risk factor. Like if literally everybody is going to get heart disease because of LDL, you have to acknowledge that as a risk factor. Like, that's really stupid.
Recently, in the last few years, you're just...
Trends and disparities in cardiometabolic health. Proportions of adults with optimal cardiometabolic health based on adiposity, blood glucose, blood lipids, blood pressure, and clinical CVD. It literally states blood lipids as a risk factor. So this is cardiometabolic health, not metabolic health. And it states blood lipids as a risk factor. So this paper immediately acknowledges that LDL or ApoB is a causal risk factor for heart disease. So he's literally referencing a paper that disproves the premise of his argument. This is a joke. Oh my God. You know what? I think I might actually...
My name is Paul.
Reach out to Paul for a debate.
Screen share. Trends and disparities in cardiometabolic health among U.S. adults, 1999 to 2018. So this is published, I think, in the last few years. This is probably a 2021 study.
It says 2022 right at the top.
Yeah, 2022. So you can see here in the conclusions that the percentage of U.S. adults with optimal cardiometabolic health is...
But how did they define that? What is the...
Yeah, so what this guy should point out is that blood lipids are included in the criteria that assess cardiometabolic health. So they're acknowledging that LDL and ApoB are causal risk factors in cardiovascular disease. He's literally referencing a study that goes against his own claims. So, it's just baffling that he's doing this.
The definition
right up here. Adiposity, blood glucose, blood lipids, blood pressure, and clinical CVD.
Yeah, there you go. Blood lipids. I think he's going to point it out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you include all those things, absolutely. That's the entire country. But Paul, that's the entire country. That's literally the whole world's population.
That's what I'm talking about. And let me show this other study. That's exactly my...
Yeah, so what he should have done was point out that, again, they're including lipids in the analysis. So they're acknowledging they're a causal factor. His claim is they're a non-causal factor. So why is he referencing research that goes against his fucking claim?
Point. That's exactly my point.
But no one is arguing that.
Well, yes, you were sort of arguing that. But my point is that...
No, he wasn't. What a fucking weaselly liar. The only thing he claimed is that LDL is a causal factor in heart disease. He never claimed that obesity, fucking diabetes, insulin resistance, these other factors don't also play a role. He just said LDL specifically is a causal factor. Paul is just a fucking liar.
When the whole country, right, is metabolically unwell, could that confuse us into thinking that LDL is associated or causes cardiovascular disease? This is the point that I'm making, that we are disagreeing foundationally.
Yeah, so, again, Paul's spelling it out for him. He just explicitly stated his proposition, which is LDL is not a causal factor for heart disease. You might be able to find these associations, but it's non-causal. Now what Paul has to do is provide evidence for that claim. The only evidence he'd have for that claim is Mendelian randomization studies. You could argue if you had well enough controlled randomized trials, that would be good enough. But again, even that he wouldn't be able to provide evidence for. So again, if he just wanted to put the nail in the coffin, just demand that he show Mendelian randomization studies.
About the overall metabolic health of our citizens. You were saying that...
No. I'm not disagreeing.
Please don't interrupt me. I let you talk. You were saying that 10% of Americans, give or take, have diabetes, and the highest estimates were that 30% are insulin resistant. Now, I would contend, no, 90% of US Americans are metabolically unhealthy. Here's another study. This is from...
Again... the paper, you cannot, oh my God. He's linking another paper that involves lipoprotein cholesterol in the analysis. Again, this is an acknowledgement that cholesterol is a causal factor in disease. And then he's saying, oh, well, it's not related. So optimal levels of waist circumference glucose, hemoglobin. They get to cholesterol. Where is it? Did they not mention LDL? High density lipoprotein, HDL? Or did he, wait. Optimals, waist circumference, fasting glucose, blood pressure, triglycerides, high density lipoprotein. Why isn't LDL included in this? So they only mentioned HDL. That's a little weird. Who wrote this? Okay, this paper looks like it's from Brazil.
2019, essentially showing the same thing.
Yeah, so, like, again, this doesn't make any sense. So Paul's saying LDL only presents as a risk factor, assuming your waist circumference is above 102 centimeters if you're a man, your glucose is above 100 milligrams per deciliter while you're fasting. But if it goes above that, then LDL is a risk factor. Like, he has no evidence for this. None whatsoever. All this is an acknowledgement that, yeah, these are also risk factors. Like, it's just a baffling argument that makes no fucking sense. How would LDL not be a risk factor if your waist circumference is below 102 centimeters, but it is a risk factor if your waist circumference is above 102 centimeters? It's doing the same thing in your blood. So, like, if the composition of your lipoproteins is the same either way, like, it's just, there's no argument for this. It's just stupid. He's making a fucking dumbass claim. Like, it's nothing but a cope. There's no other way to describe it. Like, this guy proved that LDL is a causal factor, and then Paul's just saying, oh, only if this, but he has no actual argument. It's just a ridiculous fucking nonsensical claim. And again, if he wanted to prove that it's non-causal, then show a Mendelian randomization study.
12.2% are metabolically healthy, and they define it the same way. It's these metabolic syndrome criteria. So we've got waist circumference, glucose, hemoglobin A1C, blood pressure, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol. So yeah, I think that if you look...
So it's funny how... I don't know why this guy didn't pick up on it. The previous paper specifically mentioned LDL. If these papers are recognizing LDL as a factor, then that obviously goes against his position.
Look at reasonable metrics. These are not like crazy metrics. They don't even have fasting insulin in here, which I think would be the sort of be-all, end-all cardiovascular disease metric. But if you look at reasonable metrics of metabolic...
Well, that's just, again, stupid. You can find prospective cohorts where people don't have like insulin resistance and they still develop heart disease. It's so stupid. But I really am struggling to understand what's going on inside his brain where the exact same fucking LDL particles are harmless if there are these other like conditions like, oh, your waist is thin or you have like lower fasting blood sugar. But then they are harmful if you have a thicker waist, your fasting blood sugar is a bit higher. How does it work binarily like that? It just doesn't make sense. Like, it would affect your fucking endothelium the same way.
Health? No one is metabolically healthy, except for a very small percentage. So considering that, isn't it possible that if we are all swimming in dirty water, that you are going to see a consistent correlation between LDL and cardiovascular disease, leading people to...
Yeah, so if he's going to claim this, again, the onus is on him to explain how the exact same fucking particles could affect your endothelium completely fucking differently given a slight change in basic conditions.
Believe, potentially incorrectly, that LDL causes cardiovascular disease. And I can show, and I will show later in this podcast, there are multiple studies in which LDL risk with cardiovascular disease is stratified by insulin sensitivity. And in these small cohorts, but hopefully you and I are part of this small cohort of people who are insulin sensitive, so it matters to us. In this small cohort of people who are insulin sensitive, there's essentially no relationship between LDL cholesterol and
Show the paper.
Cardiovascular disease. So how can LDL...
Then show the fucking paper. He's not going to show the paper, is he?
Who's more?
Thanks for the donation, penis pump.
Cause cardiovascular disease if that's the case. This is the point that I'm making broadly, is that I think that we've got it wrong. And I think that we're treating the wrong target. And so when you say, if you...
Okay, so why isn't he showing the paper where they stratify with insulin resistance?
Want to do a carnivore diet or an animal-based diet and your LDL goes up, we can smash your LDL down. I don't think we should be focusing on LDL. I think we should be focusing on Lp(a), which is a much better risk factor, oxidized
it's not.
LDL in the arterial wall, and most important...
Yeah, it's not. That's fucking crazy.
Insulin sensitivity. So I think that when we are honest about how much of the United States is in
2019, CDC, 83% of the country is overweight, 40, yet who knows?
The nuance. This is the devil in the details that I want to bring in. Birmingham data.
Okay, I'm just baffled. So if he's going to fucking claim that if you stratify LDL risk with insulin resistance, you actually end up not seeing a fucking effective LDL on heart disease risk. It's only insulin sensitivity. Where's the fucking data? Now he's talking about the fucking Framingham study. Like, this is just so retarded. Oh my God. I'm just gonna keep skipping until he fucking shows the paper. Premature atherosclerosis associated with monogenic insulin resistance. That this is his only fucking argument. Really? Okay, so this paper doesn't claim what he's claiming it says. Premature like it's even in the fucking title. Atherosclerosis with monogenic insulin resistance. I believe this is the paper. I think that's it. Yeah, it is. The common insulin resistance syndrome with obesity, dyslipidemia, hyperglycemia, hypertension is associated with increased risk of atherosclerosis. Early atherosclerosis and rare monogenic forms of insulin resistance, however, has not been extensively documented. What is monogenic insulin resistance? I'm not familiar with that. Okay, it's a condition in which the body cannot use insulin properly, specific for monogenic diabetes. All right, I think I understand what that means. Cardiovascular endpoints were thus evaluated in subjects with Dunning-type familial partial lipodystrophy due to mutations at...
You can watch this.
I'm at the point in the debate where I'm just done. There's literally no point in watching anymore. 23 subjects. Wow. Very robust data set. 4 heterozygous mutation carriers and 17 were R482, blah, blah, homozygous familial control subjects. All L-A mutation carriers had FPLD with insulin resistance. In addition, L-A mutation carriers had significantly more type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia than normal family control subjects. 8 L-A mutation carriers had coronary heart disease compared with 1 normal control subject. What? Oh my God. So fucking Paul claims you can only develop heart disease if you have insulin resistance. Then in the fucking abstract of the paper, it admits one of the non-insulin resistance control subjects had coronary heart disease. Oh, like, I don't know what to fucking tell you, dude. And all this shows is that insulin resistance is its own risk factor. But how does this disprove fucking cholesterol is a causal factor? It doesn't. It just shows insulin resistance makes it worse. Like, oh my god, I'm just fucking done. This guy is just such a fucking, like, there's a fart where his brain should be. Holy shit.
Dr. Lexus will be...
But it's not funny. Alright, well, yeah, like, that's that. Like, the rest of this discussion is just bullshit. He really... I would say this guy won. If you're smart, you'll know this guy won. If you're stupid, and you're really... Maybe not even necessarily stupid is the right word. If you're just ignorant about all these things, like different lipid particles and all that, you might think Paul won or presented a good argument and you're not sure. Like, this guy just isn't really familiar with debate. Paul's initial proposition, like his actual proposition for the debate, was that LDL is a non or ApoB, you could use the terms interchangeably if you want, is a non-causal factor in heart disease. If he wanted to prove that, he could certainly prove that with Mendelian randomization studies. That would just be the easy, best fucking possible evidence. Obviously, he can't do that. So he should have just demanded that he provide Mendelian randomization studies if he's going to make that claim. I'm sure Paul would have some kind of stupid cope response. Oh, well, all the people in the Mendelian randomization study were insulin resistant. Okay, so how the fuck do the exact same LDL particles damage the endothelium when you're metabolically unhealthy, you have insulin resistance, but they don't damage the endothelium when you don't have insulin resistance? Makes no fucking sense. And then the paper he showed in support of this claim showed that the person who did not have insulin resistance had coronary heart disease. It's just ridiculous. So he has no cope response. The only other thing he could do is like try to show a robust amount of randomized trials, and obviously, like, again, he wouldn't be able to do that. So he just tried to play this game where he let Paul cope and make some like stupid excuse, and then he'd attack the dumb excuse rather than just dealing with his initial debate proposition. He could have just had the debate done with in like 5 minutes if he had just demanded Paul show evidence for his fucking claim. Like, if Paul is going to make that proposition, he has to show evidence, and he didn't. All he did was just keep making excuses. Oh, but it's size of the particle. Okay, well, obviously it's not. Oh, then it's oxidation. Oh, well, obviously it's not. Oh, okay, then it's obesity. Okay, well, no, it's not. Oh, well, it's insulin resistance. Oh, it's not. Like, on and on and on and on. And then, to somebody who's an ignorant observer, they might not really understand what's going on. And they might think Paul is giving, a reasonable answer to all this, but he's not. Hopefully that guy gets back to me. I might invite him on to the channel to discuss the debate and everything. And I actually sent Paul an email. And I'm going to see if Paul Saladino emails me back. All right, I just have to do 10 more sit-ups, and then I'm done with the sit-ups.